Okay, start over. I'd like to call it to order the study session of May 12th, 2025 at 6 p.m. Okay, tonight we have an amended agenda. Item number 1, Sumner Municipal Court update and the executive session have both been removed. That'll make some difference. And so we're going to move right to number 2, contract amendment for senior center services. I call on Jason Wilson, city administrator.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. First on your agenda is, Mayor says, an amendment to our senior center services agreement. As you may recall, we receive our senior center services from Stafford Suites. Stafford Suites was recently acquired by Sumner ALC LLC, and the new owners do desire to continue providing senior center services to the city under the exact same terms. So this amendment just replaces Stafford Suites with the new LLC. No other changes to it. It is a bit time sensitive, so this will be on your agenda next week because they wanted to get this agreement in place before they close any sale. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Barbara?
Do you have any information about the company that bought Stafford Suites?
A little bit, and I've obviously spoken to Tina Priest at length, who runs Stafford Suites. This company currently runs memory care facilities up in the Edgewood area, as well as I believe in the Auburn area.
Oh,
So they are a local company.
okay, well, that's good. All right, thank you.
Anybody else? Pat, go ahead.
Actually, I was curious as to about their experience as well. So that really was my only question, but you said they're a local company. They haven't done business at all here in Sumner. It's just that their name is Sumner or something. It's kind of.
Yeah, I know the business they run in Edgewood is the cottages at Edgewood. So I think what they do is they form separate LLCs
Okay.
for each one of their business ventures.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious if we, do you have any references or anything like that that you normally do just to give us some information on them, or is there, they have a web page or something, or?
No, we have not. And this is kind of unique because very, very rarely, we might be the only one in the state that contracts out for senior center services. So it's not a normal partnership type of relationship. So how it currently works is Stafford Suites hires a separate senior center director and a part-time staff underneath them, as well as a transportation person. And then they contract with Catholic Community Services for the food service. So while they work for Stafford Suites on paper, they really are their kind of own independent group. They don't anticipate any employee changes with this either. They plan on keeping the existing staff that are currently managing the senior center.
Anybody else? No? Okay. All right. Number 3, vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas reduction plan, climate resiliency. I will call on Economic Community Development Director Ryan Windisch.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of City Council, I'm Ryan Windisch, Community and Economic Development Director. And tonight we have a presentation on the vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas reduction plan we've been working on for the last several months with our consultants at Parametrics and Transpo. So we have Maddie Evomount and Stephanie Hertzine from Transpo. And they are going to be, and Beth Miller, who's on the screen. Beth would have joined us in person, but she's in Eugene, Oregon, so we felt like it was okay for her to zoom in. And so I was going to turn it over to Maddie to take it away.
Hi, Maddie Evomount, because it sounds like the evil mount.
Sorry, I said that.
I'm Maddie Evomount. I'm with Parametrics. I am the project manager for the consultant team. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about why we're doing this. And then I will hand it to Stephanie and Beth, who are the real stars of the show, and can answer the more technical things I won't do. Right. So you may know Sumner received a climate planning grant from Growth Management Services. This is for the development of your climate element Consistent with House Bill 1181. 1181 went into effect in 2023. It required fully planning cities to comply and to create a climate element for their comprehensive planning that includes two sub-elements, the greenhouse gas reduction and climate resiliency. The Sumner's deadline there, since obviously we're in Pierce County, the deadline for that is 2029. Your 2024 comprehensive plan, which I know you've all read, does include a climate element. That was the first cut at this, but this climate planning grant is where we take much more in-depth look. We get more of your background documents and revise your climate element by the deadline in 2029. Why it matters. Firstly, I think we covered that. You have to. It's a legal requirement. You're mandated by state law to make these updates and to include this in your comprehensive plan. Public concern, we know, there's a broad range of public concern about these issues, ranging from health and environment to also maybe just wanting to save some money on your electric bills, those kinds of things. You'll find a broad range I don't need to cover here. Funding access, the grant that we're here today because of is one of the first funding situations, I don't know, I'm stumbling that word, that you can receive for this. Commerce also makes available some education and training to implement HB 1181 to the two cities and how they can look at this. There's also the CCA, which I'm Climate Something Act right now, that is this cap and trade program in Washington, and they do take the revenue from that act and can give awards to climate focused projects in the future. So that's another funding source that Sumner could pursue. Resilience, obviously that's part of the element. The climate element is your stronger infrastructure, stronger economy. However, the environment is changing in the future. However, things happen. It's not a bad idea to be able to weather those storms. Sorry, that was a bad pun, I guess. So what we're here to talk to you about today is the VMT, Vehicle Miles Traveled, and Greenhouse Gas Reduction Plan. We want to talk about how these inform this climate element that you will end up with in 2029. Part of what we'll talk about later is that it does set measurable goals, like reducing your VMT per capita. It sets, it gives you more of a guideline, a path to reaching all of these strategies that we've identified. It also supports your land use policies, a lot of which are already in your comprehensive plan. It really focuses on making things walkable and promoting transportation, public transportation, things like that. Again, also informs your transportation policies. It helps you target where to look at, get more bang for your buck, really focus things. So it really reduces your VMTs. And it also, we did a good, Stephanie will go into this, look into the background of what the breakdown is of all your VMT in Sumner and how to best target those reductions. Same thing for quantifying your GHG reductions, gives you a better idea. And I hate to use bang for your buck again, bigger return on your investment. There are some things that we've learned throughout this process that there's things you can do that have every little bit counts, but have little incremental impacts and things that you can do that have a really big impact. And it's nice to know for Sumner which ones to focus on and which ones to really put your energy into. Also, I just cannot say this enough. It aligns with state and regional requirements, HB 1181, and strengthens your implementation. You'll see in our plan, if you've already looked at it and what we present later, it gives you, clear actions. It's an implementation plan. You will adapt. You will look at how things go, but it gives you an idea of what to look for, when to look for it, and how you may go about achieving these reductions in the future instead of just a wish list, which is also nice. Okay, make this brief because I realized how repetitive it is. In summary, our purpose of this reduction plan is to really just help Sumner with a path forward, a plan, a goal, something that's actionable and we can move forward on. It really, it can show you where to focus for things like promoting, mixed use development and supporting a shift to EV, those kinds of things. And also it just is your opportunity to also focus on the things that matter to Sumner. We've done a lot of work with Ryan to talk about, here's some things we could do. And, this is not feasible in Sumner, this isn't something we're interested in. It gives you, it's not a one size fits all for every city. So that's mostly our purpose of the VMT and GHG reduction plan, aside from complying with HB 1181. I'll stop saying that word. And I will hand it to Stephanie and talk about VMT.
Thanks, Maddie. So,
And she'll turn it off. No, just-
uh, so the vehicle miles travel assessment, first, we look at what is the existing landscape in Sumner. So we did a travel assessment. We looked at what modes are people using. There's a high driving mode. Your travel demand model, which is what we use to understand your vehicle miles traveled, shows 92% driving. That's carpool and drive alone. And that's for all types of trips. So it's not just during the peak hour, but at 92%. So fairly high. Also shows there's some long commutes, 20% of residents driving 45 minutes or more to work. And this is based on the US Census data, so their travel survey. And maybe not surprising because part of the focus of the comp plan is land use to bring more jobs to Sumner. We also lack of transit. You have Sounder, but we talked about this during the comprehensive plan that there's not other transit options. And the non-motorized network, it's developing. There's a lot of connectivity in sidewalks, and then we also identified in the comprehensive plan there's more that can be done to help with those connections. So based on the existing conditions, we started to dig into what makes up the vehicle miles traveled for the city. We used your travel demand model to understand that. We looked at the current conditions, 2023, and then also future years for 2035 and 2045. And this is consistent with your comprehensive plan. And then we divided that up because, as we know, there's a lot of cut through in the city of Sumner and people driving through because 167 gets congested. And so what we found was about 30% of the vehicle miles traveled on the city streets is actually related to cut through traffic. So that's trips that are driving through your city, but they're not stopping here. They didn't start here and they're not stopping here for a destination. So 70% is related to trips that people that are stopping here or live here, but 30% is not related to this city travel. So when we looked at the vehicle miles traveled, understanding this 30%, we decided that's outside of the city's control. You don't control the regional network and what WashDOT's doing on the system. You can partner with them and talk to them, but it's hard for you to control the vehicle miles traveled related to that. So we really focused in on that city vehicle mile travel for your plan. And then when we looked at the city vehicle mile travel, and these numbers are how the state wants you to look at this. So we're looking at annual vehicle miles traveled, and this is in thousands of vehicle miles. But the thing to note is that we broke it up into cars and trucks. And we also broke it up into your industrial area versus your non-industrial areas, because we wanted to see were there different strategies you might consider for the employees in your industrial area versus other areas of the city where you have more residents. And then breaking out the trucks, the state actually doesn't require any VMT targets for trucks. Trucks is related to economics and the vibrancy of the economy. And so they're not focusing on regulating truck VMT. We're really just focusing on the personal travel. Yes.
Oh, Sorry, I was reading the chart. Go
When
ahead.
you're talking about trucks, are you talking about semis or are you talking about?
Yeah, freight,
Okay,
freight movements,
Yeah. so the cars would cover like personal trucks.
personal trucks are covered in the cars and those smaller, but, yeah, the heavy type, trucks, they don't consider in part of this, vehicle miles traveled.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about how you gather this? You said the US Census Bureau and then you said the travel demand model. I rode my bike to 3 different meetings today and walked to one. How do you guys know that? How do you know, like, what, am I supposed to log that or do you guys have video cameras? Like, how do?
So the census, I mean, they take periodic, census, the US Census Bureau collects data, they do household surveys. And then, they also adjust their, census, they do some focus surveys and, there's a rolling 5 years that they look at. So the census is, the federal census is collecting data all the time. It's not necessarily each individual, it's a sample size in the communities to collect that data. And then the travel demand model is something that we built for the comprehensive plan. It's built off the Puget Sound Regional Council model. So we take that regional model and then we refine it for this city of Sumner and put more detail on it. And then we collect traffic counts for the city of Sumner.
So there is some data where like people are driving over those things and there is some of that, but it's a lot of other data that's kind of all compiled.
Yeah, so it's all that data together to estimate your vehicle mile
I just
travel.
want to make sure I wave if I'm riding my bike somewhere. Just to make sure I get over those.
Wave to the camera, yeah,
Something, yeah, okay.
that's
Anybody
that's
else?
us.
Before we move on? All right, go ahead.
So what the state is looking for you to track is actually your vehicle mile travel per capita. So when we say per capita, it's per resident of Sumner. And so that we have estimated for 2023, your per capita is 6.51. And then we've estimated what it would be for 2035 and 2045. And you see that it decreases as you go into the future. And that's because we're assuming you're implementing the land use plan and your comprehensive plan, which increases the density of the city. And as you increase density, especially in your town center, then that's more opportunity for people to be walking and using other modes and making shorter trips or working in the city. So maybe you're right now, I said that you have about 20% of people commuting 45 minutes. Maybe those folks can now find jobs in the city and they're not commuting as far. I think another thing we also found was only about, 500 residents live and work in the city. So with an increase in density and more jobs, you could have more people living and working in the city, especially as you get more affordable housing. So based on our work, we have recommended VMT targets of 10%. So that would be that by 2035, you would reduce your VMT per capita by 10% compared to what it was in 2023. And the reason why we were using 2023 is because that was the base of your comprehensive plan year. And then for 2045, we reduce it by 13%. This these recommended targets are based on what we're projecting you would achieve based on implementing your comprehensive plan and the land use plan that you've developed. And to achieve that, we're recommending these reduction strategies. We group them into tier 1 and tier 2. You may in the future add more to tier 2, but tier 1 are strategies that we found that you're already set up for in your comprehensive plan. when we put together your comprehensive plan, we started already looking at strategies to reduce vehicle miles travel and greenhouse gas. So you've already implemented this comprehensive plan where you want to increase residential and job density. You're looking towards transit-oriented development with development near the Sounder Station, integrating affordable housing, commute trip reduction, limiting parking supply. You've got your plans to improve your pedestrian and bicycle network. There's goals and policies in the comprehensive plan to help improve transit access and park and rides. So that was the tier one. Those are things that you have in your comprehensive plan and you already have policies. And then tier two were some things that you might consider in the future. You could consider charging for parking. That may discourage people from making shorter trips because maybe they could walk there instead of moving their car. And so,
Go ahead, Andy.
I was just curious, on one point, it says limit parking supply, and then the other one, it says install parking rides, which is just a parking lot. So can you explain the difference?
so for when we say limit parking supply, it's more related to limiting it for residential. So maybe you are encouraging residents to not own a vehicle or only own one vehicle if it's a multifamily. Or you could have an office where you're limiting parking supply, so you're encouraging people to bike or take some other mode. The park and rides is more about trying to give people opportunities to get to transit and not make that long commute trip.
Yeah, and if I could just underscore, tier one, we already have those policies in place, so we're not adding anything. And tier two, like Stephanie said, is an idea. It's not in policy yet, so it'd be a matter of course, having that conversation with council as to whether or not we want to implement that big time.
Go ahead.
The talk might be a question for Ryan, but in terms of the Sound Transit parking garage, what are the restrictions, requirements, or opportunities for like pricing parking over there, permits or whatever that might be? Are there requirements that has to be free and open to the public, or just curious because that is a tier two suggestion?
Yeah, we haven't heard anything other than it'd be free and open to the public to park. I think that's Sound Transit's policy, at least right now. I think this might be more, how do we deal with parking on the street? Do we put in meters?
Okay.
Do we meter our public parking lots that the city owns? I don't think we're quite there yet, but the idea is that you're kind of creating a disincentive to drive. And so you're looking for other options. Say, if I got to pay for parking, maybe I'll just ride my bike into downtown or get there on a bus.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out the balance between limiting parking for residents that live here and pay taxes here versus limiting the non-city trip cut through traffic. I mean, would that be more of a priority versus limiting to those of us that live here?
So we don't have strategies to limit your cut through traffic because it's hard to control that. Like, unless you're putting gates up that people can't come in, they're going to come into your city. The only way to limit that would be improvements to the facilities that the more direct routes that they would travel on.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't control those facilities. So it's hard to put into place policies, or you have some policies about coordinating with WashDOT, but it's hard to control that cut through.
I understand that. I guess I'm just looking at the strategy of myself being a homeowner and a taxpayer here. I don't care if I want 15 cars. That's my issue. And I might want to park 2 out in front and 3 in my driveway, so that's only 5. Then I guess the rest will go in my yard, which quite a few people do in this town, and we don't tell them they can't. So I'm trying to figure out the balance in that. Maybe it was your verbiage that I went, are we trying to control the people?
Yeah, well, I could
Just
give
help me
you
with
an
that.
example, at least around the train station in our town center area. We we went with a reduction in parking supply. So this was 2018. I know there's other jurisdictions and even state law that's looking at more dramatic allowances for reduction in minimum parking. But right now, we're required to build in our town center 1.25 spaces per unit, right? And there's an opportunity to reduce that even further if you can, as a developer, roll in with a study that says, hey, if you're within a block of a regional transit center, we can go down lower than that. But you know, that's an example of trying to respond to the market. We looked at some developments in Kent close to the station, and they only use like 80% of the spaces that are allowed for. So it's kind of trying to strike that balance, what's needed without overbuilding, but also our regulations also allow for like your guest parking to be counted as on-street parking as well. So trying to find that balance where you're building the right size and the right number, the right amount needed, and not overbuilding for sure. Try not to.
Thank you.
Anybody else before we move on?
Can I just ask, in terms of the cut-through traffic issue, I wondered if traffic calming itself would be a way to reduce that, to make it. We're a small town, so if you live here and you need to get to the grocery store, going over a speed bump, going through a roundabout doesn't really significantly increase your trip. But if you're trying to get around traffic on the highways, wouldn't you think twice potentially if there were some of those measures to reduce speeds to make you slow down, and also that would improve safety? Is that something that we could consider too?
Yeah, certainly you could do traffic calming, you could do some of those speed feedback signs, you could do more enforcement. If you thought there was a speeding problem with people cutting through, those types of things could help with the cut through.
Would that be a recommendation then for a tier 1? Like,
Well, we do have provide traffic calming as one
Oh,
of
yes,
the
okay.
recommendations.
okay,
I guess what I was saying about the cut through is that when we went and developed your strategies, we didn't just focus right on those, because we said it's more applying to your reduction target. That is not, the reduction target is not assuming that you can reduce the cut through traffic.
okay. So we're just kind of taking that at face value that it is what it is. The rest of it we can attempt to alleviate.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Sorry. Okay, you work for WADA. I don't. You guys do this all the time. I don't. What is traffic calming?
So traffic calming is measures that you put in the road to slow people down or keep them speeding. So like a speed bump, that would be a traffic calming measure, or you might have a roundabout or traffic circle so that people have to go around that and can't just go straight down the road.
Unless you live on Valley Avenue, you don't need those.
Yeah. So you're
Okay,
trying to slow them down.
I'm with you 100%. Thank you. I just needed to know what I was
Yeah.
looking at there.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
Okay. All right.
I'll hand it over to Beth.
Guess I'll have to click for her probably.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm here. I don't know, can you see me?
Yes.
Excellent, and I can almost see you too. So that's great.
Almost.
Well, you're very small. Well, thank you for allowing me to join virtually. I really appreciate it, and so do my kids. All right, so now we're going to talk about the GHG specific side. Obviously, vehicle miles travel has a big greenhouse gas component, but there's more to it than that. So I'm going to start with how we did our GHG analysis here. We did a 2022 GHG inventory. And this is just a way to look at all of the emissions in the town, sort of try to wrap your arms around everything to understand where your sources of greenhouse gas emissions are, so that you can understand where it makes sense to put your efforts. Just like Stephanie said, it's helpful to know where the low-hanging fruit is. So this incorporates a few different kinds of emissions. So there's the sort of emissions that happen right where you are. Those are called Scope 1, or sometimes referred to as tailpipe or smokestack emissions. it's from the cars, it's from like the natural gas you burn in your home. If you had a dairy farm, it would be from your cows, stuff like that that happen within your boundary. Scope 2 is all the emissions that happen to make your electricity. It's very specific. And then we've got scope 3, which is things that happen outside of your boundary on your behalf. So, for example, the waste that you send to a landfill in another town, or the stuff that is made on your behalf and then you use or eat in your town. So that's sort of how we like to think about dividing up the different kinds of emissions. For this inventory, we just downscaled from Pierce County's inventory by population, and then removed any sources that weren't really applicable to Sumner. So for example, we included, all your building energy, all your gas and electricity and propane and stuff like that. But we didn't include any marine transportation or stuff like that doesn't really apply. Okay, so on the next slide. Oh, and can I just say, interrupt me if there's any questions. This is kind of a complicated topic. So,
Did you want to interrupt?
Yeah, can I interrupt you for a minute, please?
yes, please.
Thank you. So looking at the prior chart, I still have it here on my laptop. These are all things basically what I'm seeing within our control. So this would not include like fires. Do those
No.
create
No.
greenhouse gases?
They sure do.
Fires?
Yeah.
Like the one yesterday across the street from my house, that probably created a big plume.
Interesting.
And what about like battery storage unit fires? That would go in this as well, right? So fires. Would fires
Yeah.
fall in this? This is all stuff you can control. Just didn't see any uncontrolled things in here. I was wondering if they fall somewhere in here. Because I think
They
they
do
impact.
not.
Okay.
However, you are right that they have impact. So this is based on what Pierce County calculated, so that then we downscaled it just for Sumner. But that is so we sometimes do those kinds of emissions inventories for forest fire, but I don't have a sense of the scale of emissions created by, say, a house fire. And that's a really good question. Some of those would count as real emissions. So all the plastic, for example, in your house burning up would count as greenhouse gas emissions. But the wood of a house, if it burned down, some of that would not count because it would sort of rejoin the carbon cycle that it was a part of previously, because it's made from a tree. But that's a really good question, and I don't really have a sense of scale to give you about how large those emissions would be. My instinct is to say that on the grand scheme of a year, right, and all the stuff that happens and all the cars that are driven and all that kind of stuff, it's a relatively small impact.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else while we're stopped? Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to give you your, so we're going to talk about greenhouse gas emissions in terms of a metric ton of CO2e. So this is a metric ton of CO2 equivalent. And we use this unit because it allows us to think about all of the different greenhouse gases. There's a lot of greenhouse gases besides CO2 or carbon dioxide. There's methane, there's nitrous oxide, there's lots of weird refrigerants that escape from your car AC. All of those things all have different greenhouse gas global warming potentials. They have different atmospheric effects. And so we sort of put them all on the same scale, we talk about things in terms of CO2e. And just to give you a sense of how much that is, this box is about a metric ton CO2e. It's about the size of a house. So for the city of Sumner, You produced about 87,000 metric tons of CO2e in greenhouse gas emissions in 2022. And just for a sense of scale of how much that is, it's about almost 10 million gallons of gasoline, about 482 rail cars of coal, and the sequestration that 87,000 acres of US forest does in a year. So just so that you kind of, it's hard to wrap your head around like gases in the air. So I find this to be helpful to understand the context. All right.
Can you clarify the forest one? So the forest, that's how much the forest because the forest creates it takes in the CO2. Is that what you're saying? 87,000 acres of forest is how much it would need to balance it out?
Yeah, exactly. That's how much a forest would absorb out of the atmosphere in a year. Yeah, so the first two are bad. The third one is good, I guess. All right. Okay. So this is how it breaks down in general. Again, this is downscaled from Pierce County. So if we did it for precisely Sumner, things would be a little bit different, but this is what a town typically looks like anyways. So I don't think we get that much better if we spend a lot more money on it. So what we've got is building energy. That's all of the natural gas, electricity. It's also like propane and other kinds of ways that people power their houses. All of that is about half of your emissions. That's pretty usual for city that's mostly, that has mostly residential, although I know there's a big sort of industrial area. The transportation energy is about 40%. So that, feeds in with what Stephanie was talking about like, more than half of that transportation energy is in passenger cars. So that's cars, that's trucks, whatever it is that like you as a person would drive, to go grocery shopping with. 6% of those emissions are from freight. So those are the big semi trucks. And then there's another 10% that is off road and rail. So that's like construction equipment and, trains, stuff like that. That's not necessarily on road transportation. And then there's another 10% of your emissions are sort of the other major sources, solid waste. So that's all of mostly that's methane generated by your waste breaking down in a landfill. Wastewater, a lot of that is methane and nitrous oxide generated by the decomposition of your sewage. And then refrigerants are all of the gases that leak out of air conditioners and refrigerators, like rooftop chilling units often have to be recharged with coolant all the time or refrigerant all the time. So that's sort of the general breakdown of all of your emissions. And what should pop out clearly is that buildings and transportation are the really big ones, right? And these are your existing buildings. These are buildings that are already built, that are, and are already owned by people, right? So getting at those emissions is going to require people to change something about the way that their building is powered. All right, so let's think about what's going on in the future. Next slide, please.
Can I ask something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
No, I know it's complicated.
On the prior chart, kind of like a pie chart, there you go, is, so I guess the good thing is I'm really listening. The bad thing is I'm really listening. So I'm wondering, when I heard what you just said, it makes me think we shouldn't build anything because it makes it worse. That's kind of, so I'm just trying to, that's not a negative statement, but it's just kind of real. So is that what we should take away from this? Or if we build, we need to do things differently? That's what I think I'm hearing.
That's
Okay,
what
I'm
we
getting a
take
big
home.
nod. Okay, I'm trying to track with you
People
here. I'm
need to
not.
live, right?
And-
I mean, people need to live. They need houses. They need to get places. We're not like gonna not do that. So,
Right,
I mean, that's the puzzle, right? How do we continue living well, but live more lightly? Um, and I would say that the requirement for the GHG reduction sub-element is a reduction in greenhouse gases overall. So it's a reduction in VMT per capita, but it's a reduction in greenhouse gases overall. So so you don't even get to slightly increase per capita. I mean, you don't even get to slightly increase your greenhouse gases if your population raises.
Okay,
So yeah.
I'm good on that. I hear what you're saying. One other
Okay.
thing, we have that wastewater treatment plant, so, I mean, are we carrying Bonnie Lake's wastewater in our 1%? I mean, that was kind of, what does that wastewater treatment plant do to us? I mean, it's a big facility over there that does a lot, so is that in that inclusion of 1% would be our wastewater treatment plant also?
Yeah, so because this is downscaled from Pierce County and because I'm not totally sure where Bonnie Lake is that in Pierce County too?
Yeah, it's our neighbor and we do
Okay.
all their wastewater. We treat it.
Okay, great. So that means that that is included in the whole county's emissions. And then your portion here is your sort of per capita
Yeah.
wastewater emissions. So if we were to do it
So it's probably low.
differently, yeah, it's actually probably a little bit.
It's us
low.
plus them. Kinda.
Hmm?
Or maybe 50%. It's really irrelevant. I just am trying to see if it is a positive or a negative for us.
Well, it's spread out over the entire county. So all of the county's wastewater is added up into this, and then you just get like whatever your per capita proportion of
Okay.
sewage is for this,
Right.
for the purposes.
Thank
So
you.
it doesn't really matter where the wastewater.
It's kind of a crappy
Does
topic.
anybody else have
Thanks.
a question before we? You do, Barbara? Okay.
So, I understand that Sumner has like 1,600 or 16,000 troops with the freight, daily.
6 to 8,
1,600,
6 to 8,000 trips a day
6 to 8.
in and out of our MIC.
And then, do you have any idea of what the number of car trips are?
Well, we had
And
a
the
slide where it showed industrial
Oh,
and
so
the
you go back
industrial
to
truck
that one.
breakdown.
Okay,
So yeah, we've counted them for sure.
yeah,
Since this was a scaled down model from the county, I think freight is probably showing up a little disproportionately small
yeah,
compared to what it otherwise be if we did a
Okay.
more focused study on Sumner, but like Beth said, it was more cost effective just to take Pierce counties and scale it down. We're still meeting our requirements, but it's probably would be more accurate if you focused on Sumner.
okay, all right, thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, you both raised really interesting questions about like what is the purpose of this, right? I mean, if it's not exactly everything that's happening, I think the main thing to take away from this is just a sense of scale, right? Here's where the big stuff is. The rest of it, don't sweat it too much. So I think that is the most important thing to take away from this. And so, like I said, if we did it very specifically and carefully for Sumner, probably things would scooch around a little bit, but I don't suspect that it would look that much different, and it wouldn't really change anything that you can really do. As we already discussed, there's not a whole lot you can do about truck traffic, for example, especially because you've got so many warehouses in there that are, generating jobs in Sumner. So you're not really looking to cut that out of your economy. All right, so let's look at the next slide. This is sort of a forecast of how we expect emissions to change through time based on actions that are happening at the state level. Okay, so on the y-axis, we've got metric tons of greenhouse gases per year. And on x-axis, we have years. All of those really saturated colors are the remaining emissions. So those are emissions that are remaining in your town through time. And all of the sort of, shaded colors are the result of those statewide actions. So, and that red line is how it would be if nobody was going to do anything about it and things just continued to grow as population grew. All right. So questions?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, if you're still explaining the graph, I'll wait, but I just was looking at it and had a couple of questions, but if you go ahead and explain it, and I'll wait.
Yeah. Okay, well, I just wanted to draw your attention to the heavy hitters in this are the Clean Energy Transformation Act. So that's requiring PSE to decrease your electricity to zero emissions by 2045, and also the ICE ban, which is zero emissions vehicles. So those are all the EV laws requiring sale of electric vehicles. So that also goes a long way towards decreasing your emissions there. Sort of darker blue has a lot to do with future buildings. And the good news about future buildings, what gets built in the future, is that they usually are quite a bit more efficient than buildings that were built in the past. We know how to build better, more efficient buildings now than we used to. And in general, new buildings tend to be more efficient than old buildings just because they're newer. Okay.
Go ahead, Andy.
Any more questions?
I'm just trying to make sure I read the graph. So I'm looking at the dark blue. Is that saying electricity? There's no electricity just goes away. What's happening there?
Yeah, that is the idea.
We're
We're not using electricity?
No, it's all green. So there wouldn't be any emissions. It would all be solar, wind,
Which created
killer.
Okay. And I'm just curious, is part of this analysis, does it have to do with how much it costs? Did you guys study that at all? Because I'm just curious, if we have a lot of bankrupt people, I'm just wondering if we are all gonna move. So there's lots of trees. I'm just curious how, there's a lot of costs. Did you guys look at the cost related to some of this? Because I think that's I'm a numbers guy, so I'm always like, this is really nice idea. Is there anybody looking at that? Is that part of this analysis?
Well, so I would say that these are all the state mandated actions. So we did not analyze the cost of these state mandated actions. But as we go through and talk about reduction strategies, for sure, cost is a really important variable, right? And you want to make sure that you're acting in such a way that you get bang for your buck, Maddie. As we go through the strategies, I'll say cost effective and, change out your equipment at the end of its natural life so that that cost burden is really only the difference between, if there is one, between sort of the conventional natural gas furnace and an updated heat pump, for example. So to minimize that cost burden for doing all these things. But it's true that we have seen rising energy costs across the board for all of the sources of energy. And that's true. We've seen rising costs for literally everything, including eggs and all that kind of stuff. So I would say that right now is a little bit of a hard time. We do projects where we very carefully try to estimate the costs of different kinds of greenhouse gas reductions measures. I'm getting pretty nervous about doing that, frankly, because there's so much volatility in all of the prices right now. So I don't think that we could come up with a really, I think you need a crystal ball to come up with really good priced out strategies. So what we've included here are things that are known to generally be cost effective, generally return on investment. But of course, all the prices fluctuate through time.
Okay, yeah, I think some of these acts and stuff, I think they're like fairly complex, so I don't think we are familiar with all of them. I think one of the things I understand with new construction on housing. I believe it's supposed to be carbon neutral at some point. Is that reflected? Are you aware of which one of that, is that true?
So the new construction, they are asking buildings to decrease their energy usage by it was 70% through relative to 2006 by 20. Oh, I can't remember exactly the date where all the dates involved. So that was a decrease in building energy usage. But I would say there's a lot of requirements for energy neutral or emissions neutral housing, things like requirements for putting on solar panels and putting in additional insulation and things like that to try to bring things as close to neutrality as possible. I don't think that residential construction is being mandated to go to greenhouse gas neutral, but I could be wrong. That is not my understanding of where things stand right now.
Yeah, I'm just always looking for a study that says, hey, if we get to this Climate Commitment Act and say, hey, by 2044 we're supposed to be here. I'd love to know if somebody ever does a study, if I could look at a study and say, hey, what if in today's dollars, what does it cost to build this house or this building that meets the standards in 2044 or whatever the year is, we have to hit these numbers. So I haven't yet seen that, and I'm scared to see it, to be honest, because I feel like that cost is going to be even in today's dollars. We're gonna look at the cost we got to pay for building a house now, and I was wondering if this was something you had information on or would be able to let us know, because I know you can't be exact, but you could probably pick a point in time and say, here's the cost of building now, and then figure out a cost of building if you implement how we would do that in today's dollars. That's information that I feel like is kind of eluding us as we're looking ahead, and I feel like that's a pretty significant piece of information. I know that we're trying to follow the state's mandates, but I also feel like we're trying to keep our budget. And that I feel like I'm trying to figure out where to find that information is all. So thank you if you have anything, I'd love to know. If you don't have it, I'd love to know where to find it too.
I do not have it. When I have talked to developers, sometimes we sit and do like community roundtables on these kinds of things. I mean, they will tell you that the price of building a house has gone up significantly, and it's not all in the added requirements. A lot of it is in labor too. So sort of hard to attribute any specific thing, but I would also like to see that estimate, and I have not.
Anybody else? Any other questions? All right.
Okay. All right. So now we've seen sort of where the big sources are. Oh, could you flip back? Because
Sure.
I just want to point out what is remaining. So the thing that's remaining, right? So we've got a big chunk of natural gas remaining and a big chunk of diesel remaining after the state has done all of its work. So I just want to keep that in mind. So these are the things that Sumner sort of is remaining to be done. Okay, so now let's look at GHG reduction strategies. Okay, so building energy, right? That's the big one. That's half of your whole emissions. And so those emissions are in electricity and natural gas. And so because electricity, it's possible to make electricity go to zero in a way that natural gas, even though there is there's some renewable natural gas, just not at the volumes it would be required to fuel all of our homes at the current levels. Electrifying is really one of the main strategies for decreasing building emissions. So convert from natural gas to electricity at the end of life of your furnace, or so these are actions that a homeowner has to take or a building owner has to take. So you want to look when it's at the end of the natural life, when it's financially and technologically possible. There's some bigger buildings that are harder to convert than little buildings, house-sized places. We know how to make them hot with electricity and cool them with electricity. So that's a sweet spot where really it's can be cost effective and we know how to do it. The next one is install local renewables and battery storage wherever it's financially feasible. So this sort of has a dual function, right? So this is both decreasing your emissions by creating GHG-free electricity to use. It also provides a lot of resilience for the town, especially when you include battery storage. It buffers you from fluctuating energy costs, and it also buffers you from any sort of, wildfire-induced power outages or things like that. So it can be a real resilient strategy for the town at large. And finally, just investing in energy efficiency wherever possible. Reducing energy usage is really a critical part of this whole thing. Reducing energy usage reduces costs. It's usually a winner. There's some things that don't pencil out as often. There's some places where increasing energy efficiency doesn't pencil out, especially when it's a very, very old house, or a very old mobile home. It can be hard to get those energy efficient enough to pencil out financially. But in general, in most homes, efficiency is a really cost-effective measure. Any questions on those?
Any questions for her? Nope, good.
All right, so transportation, this is about decreasing gasoline and diesel usage. So as Stephanie went through, there are a lot of sort of city level planning things that go into decreasing VMT, right? You got to move people closer to where they need to be so they don't need to drive. You got to make it easier to use other modes, all that kind of stuff. Is handled when we work on decreasing VMT. But even if we decrease VMT, make the town as walkable and bikeable as possible, put everybody next door to a grocery store, probably people will still need to drive. There will still be cars. So this is then the other two technologies to get rid of those remaining emissions are to electrify where possible. Some of this is being mandated by the state, as we talked about. But as a city, these strategies are to make that easier. There's already a lot of building code mandates going into new housing, requiring electric vehicle charging in new housing, new multifamily housing. But the existing housing can be a little bit harder to address. So electrification and enabling electrification where possible, and also electrification of the city's own fleet can go a long way towards reducing emissions. And then for the harder to electrify kinds of vehicles, like semi trucks, like construction equipment, stuff like that, switching to lower carbon fuels like renewable diesel can also substantially lower the carbon footprint of all those other hard to electrify things. Renewable diesel is sort of a relatively new product, and it is chemically equivalent to fossil diesel, at least insofar as you can use it in an unmodified diesel engine and not void the warranty. So it's a drop-in fuel. You can just use renewable diesel instead of fossil diesel and get those carbon reductions without doing much else. The carbon markets along the West Coast are really designed in many ways to decrease the price of that renewable diesel, or conversely increase the price of fossil diesels, so that they end up being usually relatively similar in price. So this is another place where there's not a whole, you can get R99 at more or less the same price as fossil diesel. Okay. Any questions on those?
Yep, Mr. Hannah.
Yeah, I'll cut in front of Andy here. Real quick, can I just clarify, Beth, that in terms of under the gasoline and diesel and decreasing VMT, you touched on multifamily and density and things like that. So I want to assume, but I just want to clarify, land use in general would be like nested under that decreasing VMT. Because I don't want to get into the loophole where we just think about reducing VMT in a silo when if we actually build a different way, provide people opportunities to live near a grocery store, school, those types of things, that is still a strategy. So that's within the decreased VMT, is that correct?
Absolutely. And that's the dream, right? That you can just walk to everywhere you want to go. And then
Right.
you have more time, you can walk to the bakery and be very French. But in any case, that's definitely part of the land use. Part of the land use and part of the city's planning, right? You decide what is commercial and what is not. How many houses per acre, stuff like that.
Sure. Thank you.
Go ahead, Andrew.
I'm just curious on this plan is on the greenhouse emissions. I know that batteries have a certain useful life and they have a significant amount of toxic things at this point. We have a lot of nickel and lithium and all that stuff. It's very, very bad for the soil. And so is part of this plan, does it incorporate the fact that we're increasing greenhouse gases through the use of batteries? Or does it, is there a part of the plan saying, hey, this is how we're going to, like, what does it do? Does it even address that, or does it kind of pretend like it doesn't exist? Or because I don't feel like there's a lot of talk about batteries, but nobody's talking about what do we do when the battery's old, and then what happens to the waste we're creating by being so efficient. Is that something that's part of this?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of that waste is not in fact greenhouse gases, but totally heard. And that's a super valid concern. One thing that we like to think about with electric vehicles specifically, but we can also talk about solar storage. But for example, an electric vehicle does take somewhat more greenhouse gases to create, but on the sort of the vast majority of the emissions that are incurred are on the usage side of things. So even taking into account that whole life cycle of a somewhat more greenhouse gas intensive vehicle to produce, the emissions overall are greatly reduced because it has relatively low emissions for usage. Now, there are other things besides greenhouse gases in the world, right? There are other concerns. There is horrific human costs to some of these mining conditions. So these are real kinds of trade-offs, but there are also horrific human costs to climate change in general. So everything has costs and benefits. In general, battery vehicles come out much better than gas vehicles on those measures. And I think it's important to note that we pair that with decreasing VMT. It's better to have fewer cars in general. When it comes to battery storage for like, we're not talking about swapping out cars, but we're talking about swapping out power plants effectively. I have not seen a good comparison of the emissions intensity of creating the batteries, but like your concern over the toxic byproduct is real and reasonable. And that's another hurdle that we need to figure out how to deal with. Say,
yeah, I'm just thinking 10 years down the road. I just don't know what happens to these batteries because as far as my house goes, when we use batteries, they end up not working after a while, even if they're rechargeable. So I just don't know what happens if there is a plan in the Climate Commitment Act to deal with old batteries. I just think to me that's a significant. We're creating a lot of batteries, we're pushing a lot of batteries, but what do we do with them? I haven't ever heard a really thoughtful idea. So I don't know if they're recyclable forever or not. Lithium is different than anyways, I haven't heard a plan, so it sounds like you don't know that there is one.
Not that I know of, and especially not at the state level plans. I would say that these are significantly different batteries than, say, like, the little tubes that you use. So I'm not sure what the plan is for getting rid of those. I do know that there is extended life possible beyond, for example, very old car batteries still have useful life as just straight up energy storage. Even if they're not as good as you would want them to be able to drive 400 miles in a car, they can still have useful life into the future as energy storage batteries.
Thank you.
Anybody else before we move on? Okay, go ahead.
All right, one more thing. Emissions from consumption and waste, right? So this is all the stuff that you buy elsewhere, you bring in here, you use, you throw away. So two main strategies to deal with that. The first and most important one is decreasing waste, which decreases your consumption. So that means food waste, that is just buying stuff you don't need, but particularly focus on food waste. This can be a real winner, right? So this is both decreasing the cost. If you are wasting food, you're throwing away money effectively, but also, so you're decreasing cost, you are decreasing emissions required to make your food, to grow your food, everything upstream of your food, and then you're also decreasing emissions downstream in the landfill. And then the second one is to increase the availability of recycling for the waste that you still do have. So trying to find good strategies to recycle. For example, I know that glass recycling is hard in Pierce County. And so, working on getting that more available, things like that. Any questions on those?
Any last questions? No? Nope, you're good.
Okay. All right. So then I just want to talk a little bit about what kind of levers, I like told you about all the strategies, but what levers can the city actually pull to implement those strategies? So the first one is through incentives, and often these are through decrease in building permit fees. So there's, mechanical fees and building fees, all these kinds of fees that the city already collects when you make any sort of improvement to your home, when you get a new furnace, all those sorts of things. The city can reduce those fees if the permit applicant does one or more of the desired actions. So it's nice. It doesn't require an additional source of funding. It's already a touch point. People are already having to talk to the city about it, and it can help people prioritize the most cost-effective solutions and do things at the time of natural replacement where they're already making a change in their house. So if you've got sort of a menu that people can choose from to get their fee reduction, they can choose whichever ones are going to benefit them the most. The other way that a city can do this is establish plans, right? So you can establish plans for your own fleet. You can establish plans for your own facilities for electrification and efficiency, your fleet and facilities. And for example, for R99, that would be a place where you make it official part of your plan to regularly inquire with your local fuel supplier about whether they have that available to sell to you. And then the other major lever the city has to pull is really education of the residents, right? You can add on to existing outreach events. You can hold energy fairs, things like that to help residents know what is available, how much it costs, what to do about it, where to look, all that kind of stuff can be really helpful for people looking to decrease their energy usage. Okay.
Any questions? Nope.
All right. So the next slide is just on so sort of ongoing monitoring and evaluation. I'll just cruise through this, and Stephanie, why don't you just correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So for VMT, you're going to want to keep track of per capita VMT. That's what you're required to reduce. Transit ridership. And so these are all different evaluation and data that you can collect to help monitor your progress on these things. Transit ridership and accessibility, number of residents within walking distance of stations can be a real good measure of how accessible it actually is. Just the straight up miles of bike and pedestrian infrastructure you have, how close together your housing and jobs are. That's a really big one for decreasing VMT. Mode shift, how are people using different modes of transportation? Land use metrics like density and zoning, how much mixed use, how much single use zoning. And then equity indicators. This would probably, Stephanie, you have to take over on that one because I'm not sure what those are.
How much affordable housing you're putting in, or when you're putting in your transportation infrastructure, is that serving areas where there may be equity issues?
Cool. Any questions on VMT measures?
Any questions? Nope. Nope.
Okay. All right. So for
Yes.
greenhouse gas,
Yes.
Okay, just a clarifying question. So when you talk about the equity indicators and where there might be affordable housing, can you just give me like a small example of what that would be? Like, are you saying, I don't want to take this out of context, are you saying that the more affluent side of town gets more transit opportunities than the less? What is it? Help me understand what that
It
is.
could be that, or when we did the transportation analysis and the comprehensive plan, we evaluated accessibility and are there areas of the city that are less accessible? So accessibility isn't as equitable in the city, no matter what income level people are. There might be areas of the city where it's just harder to ride your bike because you don't have as many paths or connections to bicycle facilities where people feel comfortable riding. So
Okay.
it can be more of an accessibility indicator, and it doesn't have to necessarily have to do with the more affluent side or that.
That's why I needed some clarification because you tied it to, your first statement was affordable housing. And then it went into equity, so I thought equity based on, yes, Jason?
Oh, wait, no, finish your statement.
Oh, just equity based on affordability. So I thought, well, gosh, does that mean this side of town versus that side of town? I was just trying to apply that to our city. That's what, thank you.
I'll just dovetail, we already use equity when we look at where do we do our sidewalk improvements, where do we do our bike path. We want to make sure that they're equally distributed throughout our community, especially when it's local dollars. I mean, when we did a bunch of improvements down in this part of the city, because they're funded by Sound Transit, so it's part of the access improvements that had to be done for the garage. But now that we've done a lot of sidewalks here, we're spending more time doing sidewalks north of Main Street, east of Valley Avenue, and just making sure that we keep that in mind as not the only decision point, but a factor that we use when looking at all of the decisions we need to make surrounding those assets.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay.
okay. Then for GHGs, 5 years is a pretty good measurement interval to be able to measure progress. You'll have your VMT estimates to measure transportation emissions, and then you'll need to sort of combine those with, so the Department of Licensing keeps track of what are the different types of cars that are registered in every, what is the different type of car of every car that is registered. So you can get information about your own sort of car population in Sumner to understand how that VMT measure translates roughly into greenhouse gases. So then the really big one, which is fortunately sort of the easiest one to get here, is is energy usage. So that's kilowatt hours of electricity and therms of natural gas, and you just ask your utility. And they know how to do it. They will give it to you and they will tell you, okay, yeah, in Sumner, we sold, X amount of kilowatt hours to residential customers, Y amount to commercial, and Z amount to industrial customers. They know how to give you all of that information. It's pretty easy to collect. Same thing with natural gas. And that's really, I mean, that's such a nice data point because it's so concrete, right? It's like exactly what it was. Here it is, how much was sold. And then other sort of metrics of progress can be sort of EV cars, solar panels installed, heat pumps installed. All of those can be good ways to track your progress. And then on the waste front, so your garbage hauler will know how many tons of waste they hauled out of your city. So that's another way to track progress on waste generation. Right. Well, I think ready for the next slide. Yeah. So more questions. You've asked a lot as we've gone through, but I'm sure you have more.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Kenna.
Yeah, I might just ask a simple question, Beth. In terms of thinking of some of these strategies seem a little bit harder to implement, to ask people to change their behavior. One thing that springs to mind that might actually be fairly simple is like planting more trees, and maybe that's something we have outreach events and educate citizens about to encourage them to do that. Maybe there's a way to incentivize that. Maybe we just worry about city-owned property to do something like that. Not aware of the kind of costs involved in stuff like that and maintaining them. But is there a reason that didn't show up in terms of reducing GHG?
Yeah. It's because it has like such a teeny tiny effect. It's
Oh,
really
really?
simple.
Okay.
I mean, keep your current trees for sure, but it takes a long time for trees to grow. It takes a long time for them to absorb any significant amount of carbon. If you remember that number, it's about an acre of forest per metric ton of carbon. So that gives you an idea of just how many trees you would need to plant to make a dent in your emissions. They also have the benefit of cooling, but we can calculate that too, and it always comes out so disappointing. Trees are fantastic. I love trees. More trees. They don't make a whole lot of, also they can be really expensive to maintain.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
they
I know,
don't
like,
usually pencil out.
Yeah, I paid attention, like the city of Seattle, I think, has undergone a lot of work to inventory their trees and kind of determine, how that's fallen short or where that's at, and then how they can use that as a strategy to reduce greenhouse gases. So it's disappointing to hear that maybe is kind of a minor impact in terms of things, but yeah, thank you for that explanation.
Follow up on that, Beth. If we had, I don't know, 200 or 300 acres of trees, is that going to start to move the needle a little bit? Like forest, like pure forest.
So, for example, we did sort of a very comprehensive analysis on Anacortes. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but they have this giant forest, like right in the middle of town. And it's roughly equivalent in area to the rest of the developed part of town. And that's the first time I've seen it show up, right? As like any sort of thing. And it's about, oh gosh, I could pull it up. It's like 5% of their emissions. So trees are wonderful. Don't take this as don't think trees are worthwhile, because I really, really think that trees are fantastic. But the most important part about trees is keeping the ones that you have. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Is that all? Everybody good? Are you satisfied? Yeah. Staff, are you?
Yeah, so this
Any more questions?
So this will be coming back to council in June 16th for action for the vehicle miles travel greenhouse gas reduction plan.
Okay.
So you'll see this exact same plan, come back with the resolution for approval.
Thank you very much. All right, moving down to council meeting agenda. Do we have any? We had two on it.
Actually, I just had a report, a very short report today.
Oh, I forgot about you, Jason.
That's okay. I know I would have gotten it in. The last meeting of the month falls on Memorial Day, which is a study session, and I talked to the mayor and we are not going to hold a meeting on the 27th, which is Tuesday, so enjoy that Memorial Day week off. Second thing, on June 2nd, which is our regular regular council meeting, is actually going to be our field trip to Kenmore. So we will not be doing any business. We're gonna go up there and tour the hangar. We are gonna be leaving City Hall at 3:30. But make sure you have that on your calendar. That's it for me today.
All right. Is that also your administrator report? So should
That
we-
was my report.
that was it. Okay, we're gonna move on then to agenda setting. Council meeting agenda calendar. Do we have any of that? Anybody have any issues?
I did have Councilor Cole is going to there's County Regional Council for me this week.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. We're through that, and we have no executive session tonight. So I think this meeting will be adjourned at 7:20.